Intamin Blitz coasters are pretty much universally loved by roller coaster enthusiasts around the world. These high-speed, twisty, airtime-filled rides are always a hit, with rides such as Maverick and Ice Speed often appearing in top lists. There's one Blitz coaster that is rarely mentioned, however, Nefeskesen at Vialand in Istanbul, Turkey, and it's a rather special coaster with a completely unique layout. Let's have a closer look. Nefeskesen starts with a gentle downwards drop to the left out of the station, which leads into the launch track. The train is slowed briefly before the launch kicks in and accelerates you to 67 miles per hour in 3 seconds. You then climb a 164-foot tall top hat before diving down through a small tunnel and pulling up into a large airtime hill. Next is an Imman inversion that flips you around before you dive down and pull up into a small wave turn to the right. The track then continues upwards to the right into the ride's finale of an inline twist before you hit the brakes and slowly glide back down into the station. All in, it's quite a short ride, at just over 2,000 feet in length, quite a bit shorter than most other Intamin launch coasters. If you're wondering, the name Nefeskesen translates to breathtaker, which is quite a cool name, but it doesn't really roll off the tongue that easily. A coaster by any other name would ride just as well though, so how does Nefeskesen ride? My first ride was in the back row, and if I'm being honest, it was a little bit underwhelming, with a predominantly floaty ride instead of the ejector airtime filled Blitz that I expected. Thankfully, the ride just needed a bit of time to warm up, and once it had been running for an hour or two, it delivered all the ejector air I hoped for. The launch is decent, but not the most powerful I've experienced. It felt a bit more like a Mac type launch than an Intamin one, but it's still a little punchier than what you get on the likes of Blue Fire or Helix. It reaches its top speed a little slower than other coasters of a similar size, taking 3 seconds to reach the maximum velocity, whereas Ice Speed does all its accelerating in just 2.2 seconds. It may not sound like a big difference, but it was quite noticeable when I rode the Ice Speed clone Red Fire the next day. The top hat is good fun and provides some nice airtime, and the drop out of it is actually larger than you might expect. It also feels extra fast as you dive through a short tunnel at the bottom, with the nearby rockwork rushing past you and heightening that sensation of speed. The hill that follows gives great sustained ejector air once the ride is properly up, or when it's running cold, a long floater section. You might be able to tell from the shape of the hill that it doesn't give the strongest airtime possible, especially when compared to the likes of Maverick, but when it is at speed, it's a satisfying bit of ejector air as you go over the top. The Imman had an interesting feature that I wasn't expecting: a bird living inside it. It appears that a bird has made its nest in the track, and every time the train comes past, it flies off. This was interesting in the back of the train, as it almost felt like something had fallen off the coaster, as you could see this shape suddenly fly off as you're flipping it round. I can think of more sensible places for a bird to make its nest, but I guess it's at least clear and out of the way of potential predators. I'm not sure how much longer it's going to last until there's an accident though. After the bird nest Imman is an overbank wave turn that serves its purpose, and the final element of the inline twist does give some rotational air as you twist round quite quickly. This is enough to lift you up out of your seat and provides one last hands in the air moment before the ride ends. Overall, I think Nefeskesen is a good ride, but it really does feel rather short, and it's almost over before you know it. All the elements are good and it's a fun ride, but it would have been significantly better if they could have included 3 or 4 more elements to make a more substantial coaster. You might notice, if you've seen a lot of Intamin coasters, that the restraints on this one aren't like any other Western coaster. I think they're a second generation version, whereas previous Blitz coasters always had over the shoulder restraints. These ones have Lat Bars, except for some reason they're quite bulky and have this extra lump in the centre which can push into your gut and be a bit uncomfortable. The tip lies just under your solar plexus, so if you've got a bit of a gut, it can be a little distracting as it pushes in. Perhaps they're designed to stop you leaning forward and injuring yourself by being in an awkward position for strong positive G, but they just make the ride a little less comfortable than it could be. They're probably better restraints than what you get on Ice Speed or the original Maverick ones though, as I remember my shoulder as being covered in bruises after the last time I spent most of the day at Mirabilandia riding Ice Speed. One thing I will say in its favour though is that it does look quite visually impressive, especially from the lower part of the park where it seems to be placed upon a cliff top with this waterfall to the side as well. It looks rather great. So why does no one ever seem to talk about this coaster when the other Intamin Blitzes are much more well known? According to Coaster Count, it's got only about 10% of the ridership of Ice Speed, or 5% that of Maverick. I think it's probably its location that's a big factor. Istanbul is quite far away from the main hub of Central Europe, where there's lots of parks. The park Vialandia also is not the easiest place to reach as a Westerner, as the English language website doesn't give any specific information as to how to get to the park, and you have to rely on Google Maps. I ended up having to get a bus to somewhere nearby the park, and having to walk to get there. It really wasn't that convenient, and the buses didn't exactly stick to a tight timetable. Getting back from the park to my hotel also ended up being a bit of an adventure in and of itself, as it really was not clear which of the buses you needed to get, and even where the bus stop was. Thankfully, a friendly Turkish former Uber driver helped me out and got me on a suitable bus, but I do think there should be a simpler way to get to the park from tourist areas of the city. The cost of a park ticket was also quite expensive when compared to other things in the rest of Turkey. Vialand as a park was quite interesting to visit though. It seems to be built on the side of a hill, which can be a little annoying when you have to walk from the bottom to the top to re-ride something. There's a total of 3 coasters there, a standard wacky worm layout which I skipped, and a surprisingly large Intamin family coaster called Mesera Perist. This was actually a rather good ride and almost seems a bit too big to be considered a family coaster, with a height that's probably a bit intimidating for a lot of younger riders. Elsewhere in the park there's a mixture of flat rides and an impressively themed Shoot the Chutes ride called Viking. It's also got a rather good drop tower, which is enclosed in a building and may not be that tall, but it's got quite a powerful drop. There's also a Pirates of the Caribbean style ride called Fatenruyasi, which I'm sure I've mispronounced, but on the English language version of their website, it's got the very literal name of Vialand Boat Dark Ride. It supposedly tells the story of Istanbul and Mehmet the Conqueror, but without understanding the local language, it was just a ride through different scenes for me. I will say that the scale of some of the scenes is quite impressive, and it seems like a decent bit of money was spent making the ride, but the animatronics weren't really the most high-tech, and it's a ride you'll probably only do once if you visit the park. There's another dark ride in the park as well, named on the English website as Vialand World Tour Boat Ride, which is essentially a knockoff of It's a Small World, complete with its own annoying music and incredibly garish facade at the front. There was also 2 3D cinema rides, with one of them taking the form of a PS2 era Aladdin, with a genie that gave off some strange Shrek vibes. Overall, the park is quite nice, but it's not the biggest park in the world and you'll likely run out of things to do if you're planning on spending the whole day there. Just like Nefeskesen, there's enough to keep you entertained for a bit, and what's there is generally quite decent, but ultimately you'll probably be left wanting for more. That about wraps up my trip to Vialand. If you've enjoyed this video, you know the usual YouTube things to do, so do them. I've been Rollercoaster David, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again in another video very soon.